Thank you for coming along. I am, for those who don't know me, Steve Reville from RISC OS Open, and I've been working in and around the RISC OS community my whole professional life, and going back beyond that even. And today I've got a few topics that I wanted to cover. The first of which is a topic that is a recurring theme for us at RISC OS Open. It's, if you are new to RISC OS, there may be some of you who are new to RISC OS. Maybe you're watching this talk on YouTube and it's the first time you've heard of RISC OS. If you're not, if you're a more seasoned user of, let's move the mic. If you're a more seasoned user of RISC OS, just put yourself in the shoes of someone who's never used it before and imagine what it feels like to use it for the first time. And ask yourself what that experience is like. This is something that we have been thinking about, and a lot of people in the community also think about. And I wanted to talk you through a few of the things that have been going on that help to improve this experience. So one thing you'll be aware of is many of the other operating systems were developed in parallel. It's like a parallel evolution. So what RISC OS does is quite different sometimes to what a lot of the established norms are nowadays in other operating systems. So these are some of the things that we want to tackle to allow people to have a more intuitive and seamless experience without the detriment being that it harms the existing users. So I've got a few examples of things that are both in the works or things that have happened recently. And one of them is that we've got more and more work happening around just the theme that you can have for RISC OS. The themes that you can have, there's the ability to customize the icon bar is new in RISC OS 5.30, so that came out last year. And there's some other work happening in RISC OS around just personalizing it, because a lot of people increasingly are used to personalizing their devices, making it work and look the way they want it to. We've got an idea for a change that has been discussed in a previous show, which is just to make password fields a bit more friendly so that you can click on a little icon and see what the password is, what the hidden text is, much like you see on other operating systems. There's an option that is done in the nightly builds for hiding the critical system folders, because RISC OS has some folders at the root of the hard drive that are quite delicate and fragile and important, and if you accidentally as a new user rename them or delete them or damage them in some way, you'll end up with a system that doesn't boot anymore. So there is now an option to hide those folders in the filer so you can't accidentally injure your system by meddling with them. But again, by default that option is off for most systems, so when you're used to that stuff it's fine to have it there. We've also got a beta release of a customized icon bar layout which swaps the order of having applications on the right and file systems on the left, which we're all used to in the RISC OS community, but quite often in other systems it might be the other way around. So there is an option that we're going to be introducing where you can swap that. And again, the default for most people will be to have it the way that we've always had it for RISC OS. But for some other people, this icon, the task manager in particular, is where you have the shutdown and important stuff configuration that, again, some people will be used to seeing that over on the other side. So there's an option to swap that. We've also got ideas and concepts for what we'll do with the window manager just to make it feel a bit more friendly for people to use. Some of this is to associate sound effects with certain actions, like closing icons or inserting USB sticks and having a sound play so that you know that something has happened. So sound effects is something, again, we're used to on other operating systems, on other devices, but we're not necessarily so used to those in RISC OS, so that's a feature that is currently being thought about. We've also, I was talking about theming, we've got on our stand just a kind of it's a working prototype of a dark theme for RISC OS, so you don't have to have all the bright windows, you can have a darker theme. and we're not the most artistically talented, so we haven't got it there exactly the way we want it to be. We'll reach into some graphic artists to help us make it look a bit prettier, but we would like to release a dark theme for RISC OS and have that as the first of hopefully many. To do that, we've had to overcome various challenges, and there's a few that are visible in this window, in this screenshot, where RISC OS is kind of fighting against you when you want a dark theme. So, for example, there might be areas where it's got hardwired use of black text. So we've made a few changes to account for that. And there's various things where it might fade an icon that's not clickable. It might fade it, and it always fades it to be lighter. And so we need to have that tailored so that it'll fade to darker as well in the dark theme. And again, we'll want to make it so that programs on RISC OS can find out what theme is currently loaded, whether it's a light theme or a dark theme, and they might have their own icon sets that look better on dark than light backgrounds. So again, a lot of this stuff is optional, and if you're used to it being the way it is, you don't have to have this stuff, but if you're coming to it from outside RISC OS, it can really help smooth the transition. And there's another example that I have all the time, is I might be using Windows, and then I've got a window open where I'm seeing a titanium machine. I'm seeing my RISC OS desktop in a window through a VNC connection. And so I'm constantly clicking over here and doing something in Windows, and I'm clicking in RISC OS and doing something in RISC OS. And if you suddenly find that the middle and right mouse button do the opposite thing, or certain things happen a different way, it can be very confusing or irritating. So that is another option that we're looking at adding, is to swap the right and middle mouse buttons, so people can have the right button be the menu button. And I know this is kind of against 30 years of RISC OS history, but it smooths that transition back and forth. And again, the default will be to have it as the standard RISC OS way, but people will have the option to do it the other way. And I think there are third-party modules that provide that kind of feature. And another part of the experience that's super important is getting started with RISC OS in the first place. So here I've got, again, I'm not a graphic artist, but I've got a mock-up of what we think the first boot of RISC OS should look like. We believe that the experience should be much like when you first install Windows or first install another operating system. You want to be asked some critical questions that help you, in a really straightforward manner, get the system set up in the way that you need it to be set up, so that from subsequent times that you boot the machine, it's going to be booted into the state that you need it to be. So the first and foremost is, where are you? What language do you speak? That's quite useful and important. And of course, the whole thing about multiple territories and multiple languages is an area where there could be vast development in RISC OS. But a good starting point is at least having this user interface experience internationalized, so we have different languages supported in this part of it, so people can get themselves off the ground and get things up and running, regardless of where they are in the world when they're first trying it out. So the next screen that comes from here, you can, of course, if you don't want to go through all this and you're happy doing it the way you've always done it, you can just get out of this and do it the normal way. But if you want to follow this process, the next step we're proposing is, how do you want to connect to the outside world? Do you want to use Wi-Fi, wired network, or are you not bothered about that? It's just going to stand alone as a machine that's not connected to the internet. So that's an important question to ask the user. And then the final question is, how do you want it to look? Oh, sorry, not the final question, but the next question, how do you want it to look? And the main thing is, do you want the traditional RISC OS light theme, or perhaps a new dark theme? And then, of course, you can go and tailor it beyond that afterwards. And then we just come to some key questions, which are about, what are you used to in the way you interact with the computer? Are you used to having storage on the left and apps on the right, or do you prefer it to be the other way around? Do you want to hide the system folders, or do you want to have them right there where you can meddle with them? And which way round do you want the mouse to work? And this is all conceptual. And what we're planning to do is just pop this on our forums on the RISC OS Open website and have an open discussion in the community, and hopefully get a lot of people's suggestions and ideas and narrow it down into something that we can then implement as a welcome to RISC OS first time boot set of screens. And probably start with the Raspberry Pi image and have it on there, and then work out from that. So feel free, if you've got thoughts or ideas, please do swing by after the talk, and you can catch me at the stand. And I don't want to take any of the credit for all of this. It's not RISC OS Open that's doing all of this. It's lots of people in the community try to make the experience better. And one of the things I wanted to just call out is some conversation in the forums recently. There's a guy called Paolo who's, it's not very easy to read. He's written, basically, he's implemented a way of ChatGPT having chats. So it's an AI chatbot that you can talk to. And one of them has been trained on the basic user guide, the RISC OS user guide. And another one has been trained on the BBC Basic reference manual with lots of example BBC Basic programs. And the reason why I think this is super interesting for someone who's new to RISC OS or wants to learn how to do something new like programming in BASIC is you can literally have a natural conversation with one of these things, and it will help you get started, and it will answer your questions, and then you can ask further questions. And it is referring back to a 600-page user guide and giving you a summary instantaneously that you can then question and ask for clarifications on. So this is available right now online. So if you go on our forums, you'll see that some of his experimental work on this. And I think is a great idea. And there's lots of other opportunities for us to use similar things to make it better for any user of RISC OS, whether you're new or otherwise, if you just want to learn something new. This is, by the way, this wording here is not just me mocking it up. This is genuinely, I just asked that question in one of these ChatGPTs, and that was the start of its answer. So this is how it talks to you, and this is what the conversations look like. So I think all of these ideas are brilliant, and they just lower all of the barriers to entry that might exist for people who have just become acclimatized to the world outside RISC OS, and they want to explore RISC OS now. Another thing that is important for the world to see in RISC OS is the community hub, which is the RISC OS Open website. So we've maintained this since at least 2006, and it has grown and become very popular, and it is a focal point where a lot of conversations in the RISC OS community happen, where we point to where the latest releases of the source code are, the latest downloads. It's also where people can register bug reports. So it's a really important resource for the whole community, and it's important that that reflects the essence of what RISC OS is, and we believe that it needs to be a constructive environment, and it needs to be a place that people want to come to find out more and to get help. So one of our guys is called Andrew Hodgkinson, and he is based in New Zealand, and he has been burning the lunchtime oil, which is probably the midnight oil for him. He's been working very hard indeed on updating our site, which was very much showing its age. Most of the stuff sat behind the site was at least 15 years old and horribly unsupported and out of date. And one of the key things that he's done is he made the site work much better on mobile phones, mobile devices. So that's been an important step. And the other thing he's done is he's made the forums much better and easier to use, but he's also added an ability for, in the forums, if you feel like a chat is going off topic, or if you've got any questions you want to ask privately about a conversation that's happening there, you can reach out to a team of moderators who are volunteers from the RISC OS community, and we can help organize things in the forum. We can move chats that have kind of gone off topic, we can branch them out into a different chat somewhere else. And so we can at least help keep things so that they are constructive, they're positive, and things are staying on focus on particular conversations. And the other side of it is it helps us to be compliant with the increasing amount of legislation that exists around running this type of site. Including the UK's Online Safety Act that came into force this year. So sat behind that, we have a set of site guidelines that we've published for the RISC OS Open sites. And I think most people would read these and just see them as common sense, hopefully. We did have a month of discussion on the forums, very useful discussion, where we were able to refine this with input from the community itself. And at the end of this month, we're just going to finalize version 1 of these guidelines, stop them being draft, and all of our forums and other parts of the website can point back to these guidelines and say, by the way, guys, remember that this is the atmosphere we're trying to create on this community hub. We want people to be, we don't want people to be discouraged from coming to this site and using it as a valuable resource. So it's every show to give an update on what's happening in the bounty scheme, and this show is no different. So we do have several bounties that are open at the moment, and they are just collecting. So just to give a bit of context about the bounties, this is a way for people to show, vote with their wallet for the features that they think and improvements that they think are worth doing in RISC OS. And it's a way to hopefully attract developers who are also interested in those features and those developments, and give them a bit of encouragement to go and do that work. Because there's a lot of great stuff happens for free, and there's a lot of other stuff that if you need to carve out some time to do it, you need to hopefully get a bit of money back to justify it. So we hold the bounty in escrow until some developer is able to come and claim that bounty and do the work and deliver the objectives. And we've got several that have reached the target, but we have a bit of backstory about some of them as to where they are. So the toolbox was claimed in the past. This is about reunifying all of the good stuff that happened in the RISC OS 4 fork of the toolbox into the RISC OS 5 version of the toolbox. And unfortunately, the original developer of this bounty had to pull out. So we reopened it, and it was claimed by another developer. And unfortunately, after a while of them not making progress, we got in touch, and their circumstances had changed, and they weren't able to progress it either. So they've dropped away. So we've made about 10% progress on that bounty, but we've had to reopen it again until we can find someone who's able to claim it and do the work. And the file system improvements, we're not starting step 2, so we know it's ready to go. We're not starting step 3. Until we've finished the other 2 bounties that are related to it. So I'll come on to those. But it just doesn't make any logical sense to actually start on this because we've got another 2 related ones that are actually underway right now. And I'll just touch on Unicode as well. So this is part of the internationalization I was talking about earlier. To have RISC OS truly support other languages and other regions around the world, there's quite a lot of work that's needed in the desktop itself in the various different applications to make it properly support Unicode and properly support all of the different fonts and ligatures and different languages that people speak. At the moment, it's quite constrained and it's a very limited implementation. So there's a lot of rough edges, and that's what this bounty is aiming to address. So we're still quite some way off collecting that one. But there's plenty of other stuff to be getting on with, so I don't think there's an enormous hurry for that one. So talking about the things that are in progress, the paint improvements bounty has been gradually adding more and more features and making progress quite well. In fact, some of those features made it into RISC OS 5.30, and some of them are in the nightly builds now. So you can finally, at long last, you can adjust the resolution, the DPI, of images. It used to be always that Paint, you created it at a certain DPI and then you could never change it after that. And you've got transparency. Various different types of transparency are being added to Paint. And the latest support that we're planning to add is the ability to add the transparency, edit the transparency mask as well. So there's quite a lot of good things happening there. But there's a few more bits to do. So we're about 78% of the way through that bounty now. File system updates, they are big, complicated, and the developer has had to pause them for family reasons. So hopefully he's going to be coming back to that not too distant future. But at the moment, we think he was doing a great job until he did have to pause them. So we'll pull him back when he's back available. USB was partly claimed, so there was one developer that claimed it. We had a conversation with them. They didn't want to do the whole bounty, but they did have some specific parts of the USB stack that they did want to touch. So we agreed to give them a portion of the bounty if they did their bits. And they have indeed done their bit, so it's at least progressed somewhat, but now we're looking for another developer to come along and do the remainder. And in fact, what we've done is we've found that other developer, and he's very good, very talented, and he works at a consultancy in Cambridge. And what that consultancy has agreed with us is in any downtime between any contract work that he has, in order to keep him occupied and happy, he's going to be working on our bounty. So, and at the end, he gets his bounty payment from us when he delivers it all. So it's a win-win for everyone involved. And then the PRMs, so there's the programmer's reference manuals. If you don't know, there's a set of comprehensive developer documentation that's published as printed books. And over the years, Acorn released several editions of these things, and they grew in volumes. And since that time, since probably the late 90s, lots of other things have happened that have added to RISC OS and changed things that are in the programmer's reference manuals. Those books never got changed. So the first step of updating the programmer's reference manuals, which is a huge job, is not going to add any new content to them at all. All it is doing is consolidating all of the information that exists and just making the existing stuff sensibly arranged in one set of volumes. Because at the moment, you have to look at the original volumes 1 to 4, and then you have to look at the appendix in 5A that says, oh, by the way, some of the stuff in there is wrong. It's actually this now. And then you go, oh, actually, 5A has also been superseded by this document over here. So, by the way, that bit of 5A is wrong, so don't do that, do this. And it's like a choose-your-own-adventure trying to write software for RISC OS now. So what we want to do is get rid of that and just take the existing information and write it in one set of books. And then we will take that set of books and fully update it to reflect today's RISC OS and all of the APIs that now exist. So there's quite a lot going on in the bounties. And hopefully you can see it's not really, RISC OS Open aren't really doing the development at all here. It's other very kind and generous developers donating their time and energy. We're mostly just corralling and trying to find mechanisms to connect the developers to the bounties and get the work done. And the other thing I would say is each bounty does have a description on our website, which can sometimes be a bit technical. But if anyone wants to know more about a bounty, or they want to help shape it and be involved in it in a way where they're not developing, maybe they want to get involved in testing or in saying, I would really love it if it did this, if I had this particular feature, please do get involved on the bounties part of our forum and just start the conversation there. So we are very much open to people being involved in it. We don't want it to be hidden secret projects. We want it to be fairly open, but there are some limits to that in that quite often the developers themselves want to remain anonymous. So we need to be careful about either not putting unfair or undue pressure on developers who are working their spare time, or we also don't want to leak their identity sometimes as well. Hopefully that all makes sense. There is one other bounty which is called the Git client. This is really useful for developers. I'm not going to bore you with all the details. There's a bit of a summary there, but we have got the latest beta release of the Git client is going live extremely soon now. I think it might have already gone live in the last 24 hours. So there's various quality of life improvements. And this is an example of one of the bounties where we set out the objectives right at the beginning. The developer who claimed it keeps suggesting new improvements and enhancements that are beyond the scope of that. So we're ending up getting even more things out of it than we ever originally thought. And it's all in the hands of the developer and how generous they're being. So that's great. Right, so I'm just going to move on to the final topic for today. And this is something that we announced on Thursday night, which is called the moonshots. So RISC OS Open we've been talking for years now about some of the bigger, we've talked about tip of the iceberg and all of the other things. So there's some bigger activities and pieces of work that are required for RISC OS, and the bounty scheme has only ever been tickling the edges. And it's a bit like saying the bounty scheme is kind of walking up a down escalator and just keeping yourself where you are. It's kind of improving some of the most glaring simple things, but it's not addressing some of the huge glaring problems. So one of the big problems that we've talked about that is arriving now is ARM moving to 64-bit architectures. And most people don't really know what that means, but the main thing is a lot of the core of RISC OS is written in handwritten 32-bit ARM code, and that simply doesn't run on 64-bit processors. And that is why RISC OS as it stands cannot run on the Raspberry Pi 5, and it cannot run on the Pi 500, the keyboard version. So at the moment, there is no chance that natively RISC OS will run on those, because so much of it is written in a version of ARM that those devices simply cannot run anymore. And we're getting to the point where almost no ARM chips are coming out that have 32-bit support in them. So we're in a world where, like Acorn were back when they had that transition to 32-bit from 26-bit, and they had the same problem. They left it too late, and the strong ARM came out for the RISC PC, which was 26-bit. It had 26-bit and 32-bit, and at that point, they had not yet done 32-bit, but then they realized that Xscale, lots of other things came out, and they didn't have 26-bit support in them anymore, and suddenly RISC OS couldn't run on any of the chips that were coming out. So eventually, they just couldn't buy strong ARM chips anymore, and it just forced their hand that they had to change RISC OS over to being 32-bit, because otherwise there were no more chips in the world that they could build machines out of to run RISC OS on. And that is what we're facing with this 64-bit transition now. And again, it would have been great for this to have all happened 10 years ago. But what we would like to do is at least have a fighting chance of doing that 64-bit work. And it is enormous. There's a lot of work to do there. We've estimated that it's anything up to about 20 man-years of work, if not more. And there's no way you can do that with one developer in their spare time. It needs several developers full-time committed to this. And you ask, well, what's the value in it? I mean, what is the benefit? Well, the benefit is that we can get it running on the Raspberry Pi 5. It will naturally work on whatever comes after the Raspberry Pi 5 and various other hardware platforms that are out there. We will make RISC OS capable of running on that. So what are the moonshots? So the way we've announced it is we did a press release, I think it was Thursday night, and I published an open letter on our websites, and I've sent it to various people. I'll be sending it to more people. And I'm just making the case for why we would believe that it would be helpful for RISC OS for people, either corporate entities or people who've got high net worth and they've got some background in RISC OS or ARM, to get involved and help us, either connect us to the funding or provide the developers as an interesting exercise for learning about embedded development, for example. So there's lots of different avenues we could potentially explore, but what we really want is to secure enough funding to allow us to put together a team of developers for several years to do a lot of work on RISC OS to give it a future, which is a lot to ask. But the flip side is, we think if we don't succeed in that, we're in no worse position than we are now, so we should try. And there's no reason not to try. Sorry, my mouse is not working very well. So I'll just cover off a very high-level explanation of what we believe we need to achieve is we've carved RISC OS up into, there's some bits that are in ARM code that are going to have to stay written in ARM code, and they will need to be written again in 64-bit ARM code. But we'll keep that to the absolute bare minimum. Everything else that is written in ARM code, there's two options. One is to just rewrite it in a language called C. And C, you can just put it into a tool like a compiler, and then you can build it into 32-bit or 64-bit or something else. So C inherently is more portable and more future-proof. And the other good thing about C is it's a higher level language, which means it's more expressive, it's easier to understand it. There's 10, 20 times more developers in the world who understand C than understand assembly language. So you've got a much bigger pool of people who can get engaged with doing stuff. So C allows new features to be added with a lot less effort than trying to get your head around a load of ARM code and hack it around to make it do the new things that you want it to do. So rewrite a lot of the ARM assembler stuff in C. There's a lot of core applications that are part of RISC OS that will also need tweaking and fixing and making so that they can work on either 32-bit or 64-bit. And then we've got the other final step, which is to make sure there's some way to support all the 32-bit code that we can't change anymore. So it's called emulation. It's a way to, even on a 64-bit platform, pretend you've got a 32-bit chip so that you can run old software. It won't be fast, it won't be optimal, but it at least will hopefully allow it to run. And we've seen this before with Emulor, which allows 26-bit stuff to run on 32-bit hardware. And there's plenty of other emulators. RPCMU is something that people use to pretend to be a RISC PC on a Windows machine. So these are the four key parts. There's a lot more behind this, and we've got a wiki page that discusses all of the details, the gory details, and that's been on our website for the last 4 or 5 years. And we've had lots of forum conversations about it as well over the last 6 years. I think for the last 8 years or so, we've been talking about this at shows. So this is the sorts of activities that people will be focusing on if we can secure enough funding to get the work done. And we don't have to get it all up front. We can come at it piece by piece, so we can get there in stages. But it's important that each stage is valuable and useful, and it's not all based on some future promise of, in the future, you'll get this big bang where we'll do a new 64-bit thing, and if this WYSI hardware exists in the future, it'll be great on it. We want it to be stuff that you could go, well, on my Raspberry Pi 4, I've got a new thing that's useful and valuable, and that's come out of this project. And so to make that more real, I'll give you an example. That's my wiki. That's our wiki page. I won't bore you with that. So here's an example. Basic. So basic module was written by Sophie Wilson in parallel with designing the ARM chip. The two things were pretty much written hand in hand. And it's an interesting piece of code. It's very clever. It's very hard to understand. Only a few people in the world understand it. I took over maintaining it from Sophie when I was at Acorn. And it was great fun, a great learning experience, and I've since forgotten everything. And it's a big wodge of ARM assembly language. And I think the fact that it's a big wodge of dense, difficult to understand assembly language has prevented us from easily adding lots of new good stuff to BASIC over the years, because it's just so hard. So at the end of last year, I resigned my day job. And I wanted a bit of a break, and so I spent probably quite a few months, the last several months, at my own risk, thinking, well, what would it be like if we had BASIC written in C? And that is what I have been working on in the background. And the idea is that because it's written in C, I can build a 64-bit version of BASIC, or I can build a 32-bit version of BASIC. But it's, I think, hopefully, nicely written. It's written with different objectives. I'm not trying to make it the most compact thing possible. I'm not trying to make it the fastest thing possible. I'm trying to make it easy to understand, very respectful to the language that is ARM basic. So every little esoteric edge case of the reference manual, it implements. And it's got to be easy to extend. And so I've not finished. There's more work to do on it. But there's other side effects. So you'll notice here we've got int64. So you can start it and say, I want my integers to be 64-bit integers instead of 32-bit integers. Or I'll start it with traditional 32-bit integers, please. So even on your existing machine now, you would be able to run it when it's finished. You'll be able to run this version of BASIC, and it will be essentially the same as the one you've got now. But the massive difference is I have a big, long list of all the great things we could do to the BASIC language, like structures and long strings and freeing blocks of memory. All of that becomes much, much easier to add on. So, I could add some of these things in a few days or a few weeks. And so if you tried to do that with the ARM version of BASIC, you'd still be going at it in a year or several years. So the benefits to the RISC OS community of doing it this way is we've got code that comes out during the project that is valuable to people now, but the end result is a whole piece of RISC OS that should work on Raspberry Pi 5 and other processors beyond that. Other platforms beyond that. But of course, I can't sustain doing this sort of thing as a spare time activity. I can't tell you the number of times over the past few months where I've just sat there for several weeks with my brain melted, trying to understand how the heck to solve some certain problem. And that's because I've not been looking at all the source code to BASIC and faithfully replicating all of it in C. I've been looking at the reference manual, I've been writing BASIC programs and seeing what happens, and I've been saying, okay, so I think I need to implement it like this. Do I get the same effect? I've been looking at the BBC Micro's BASIC reference manual because it's got more detail about some of the inner workings. I have been looking at the source code, but I'm trying to write it as clean room C. So it's quite hard, and I can't sustain that. And this is another reason why we need the moonshots, is because people like me, other developers that we want to get doing other things, they're simply too complicated to just drop it and pick it up for a few hours, drop it, pick it up for a few hours. You'll spend all your time trying to remember what the heck was going on, and then you'll have run out of time to do anything useful, and then you'll have to put it down again and stop. So they just don't lend themselves to being spare time activities. So I'm not expecting the RISC OS community to suddenly fund the salaries of all the rule team because it's just too much of an ask. What I'm expecting to do is to go out and do the legwork of speaking to a lot of people around the technology world, hopefully some of those high net worth individuals or those business leaders, and ask them, is there any way they can help? Is there anything they can do to show their support? There's other examples that are parallel to this, like the Computer Museum in Cambridge. There's people who've made very good philanthropic gestures to keep that museum going. They're not going to get a return on investment out of doing that. They're doing it out of the goodness of the heart. They're doing it out of the love of the end goal of what they're supporting. And I believe RISC OS is in a similar camp. It's the sort of thing that I'm passionate about. I think a lot of people in this community are passionate about it. We don't want it to become a relic that can only run on hardware that you can't even buy new anymore. We want, for the next 10, 20 years, to know that there will be more platforms that we can buy and we can run it on. And beyond that, it will be easier to adapt it to the next generation of things that then come up. So I think there's a journey we're going on, and we're just at the very start of it now, and most of the activity for us will be to do all the legwork of speaking to people and making the case, seeing what the challenges are that come back, and seeing if there is a good answer. But I think the best answer I can give is we've been passionately working to safeguard the past, present, and future of RISC OS since we formed RISC OS Open, and we still feel passionately about it. And And it's not being done because anyone wants to get rich. It's not being done because people are chasing money. They're chasing it because they're doing it because they believe RISC OS is interesting and valuable, and we enjoy it, and we want to keep it going. And that being said, I think I have some time for questions, hopefully. 5 minutes for questions. Anyone? Hello.
Hi. Going back to the start, Steve, when you were talking about new users and filling in some nice boxes, are you working along with RComp on that? Because a lot of the new boxes coming out are coming from them, and if they haven't got that sort of stuff in it, you're not going to hit your target.
Yeah, so I want the whole thing, that's conceptual, that's first out-of-the-box experience. I want that to be a community discussion, and RComp very much be involved in that. I don't want it to be a, we do it and throw it out there at the community. Yeah.
It's fine, but if it's just a raw offering, it's not a lot of use, is it?
No, I want it to be like RISC OS. I want it to be an open source thing that people can use on their distribution. And like the way you can skin, RISC OS developments might have their own look and feel for their version of RISC OS. They might want their own look and feel for this first boot screens. But the core of it, the set of questions that you ask, I think everyone has ideas about what needs to be asked and what bits of control you do want to twiddle in RISC OS. What bits do you fiddle with and are a pain in the bum every time you first have to get a machine working that you never really touch again? How do we simplify that process of just easing someone into it? And how do we not get in the way of the people who are quite happy to just get on with it and get into plink configure and start messing with stuff? So we want to make it so you can bypass that if you want, but yeah, we want to work with RISC OS developments. We also, it's really important to get the voice of the people who use RISC OS every day.
Yeah, I should have said RISC OS developments, not RComp.
Sorry, RComp.
I should have said, RISC OS developments are the ones doing the operating system, doing the distribution.
Yeah, RComp, or even CJE. Anyone who's selling a system with that's their bespoke distro of RISC OS, we're not going to prevent them from using whatever comes out of this. So they can take it and adapt it if they want. Any other questions? Or have I been so comprehensive, answered everything? Hello.
We ask this every single year.
Yes.
Multi-core.
Multi-core, yes.
That's it.
Yes. That's also one of the biggies, isn't it? And preemptive multitasking is another one. They're not really in the current 64-bit plan because that's its own set of challenges. It's they're probably their own moonshots. But what might happen is it might be deemed that as the moonshots evolve and that big, massive wiki page we've got with the AArch64 work, it might be that as the conversations evolve, we realise that actually it's better to tackle those things first rather than some of the other bits that we've got planned. So we might say, I'd rather figure out that stuff than do an emulator. So I think it's all quite fluid still, especially, I don't know if anyone's seen, but the moonshot that we've got at the moment we just estimated that the project, if you did it all right, would be about £2.5 million worth of paying for developers, which is enormous and crazy, and you can't probably get there in one step. Yeah, there are some very high net worth individuals, but probably not that philanthropic. I think it's when you're having conversations with them, you're going to allow them to steer some of what the finer details of the plan are, which is why we're asking for people to come and talk to us. And we're not saying just give us a bunch of money and you will hope that we deliver this plan, because that's not what we want to do. We want it to be, first of all, we want it to be an open source project so people can all see the progress as it's happening. But secondly, we want to do it in discrete chunks of delivering outcomes that are valuable. So, for example, that basic thing that I just showed you, I know exactly how much more work I think it's going to take to finish that, and I know exactly how valuable it is, and I can already see all of the benefits that can come from doing it to everyone who uses BASIC. And by the way, it's taken one small but significant step towards a 64-bit RISC OS. So I don't have a concrete answer to when will that happen. All I can say is right now that's not what we were going to focus on, but it is another one of the big things. Am I out of time, or is it okay? Okay. Well, in that case, well, thank you everyone again for coming along, and thank you.